Welcome to the Hemingway Man. Does he still exist? And should he? This is a whole new section for us. We've been talking about some of the definitions of ways of reading. We've talked about biographical readings. We've talked about feminist and Marxist readings. We've done psychological readings and the motivations behind the hero or protagonist of the story. Now we're going to get into a little bit of a different area, though all of those factors still exist, of course. But in particular, we're going to talk about gender issues. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? And this is a fun section. I hope you're going to enjoy it. And so off we go. Why is Hemingway important? Hemingway is one of the most important authors of the 20th century. Yet some high schools have banned reading him because some consider him to be misogynist. But the real reason he is so important is because in his writing he demonstrates the ideal man of the 20th century and the hero's journey to be this man. Now, to understand Hemingway's place in society or in history, it's important to note that Hemingway was once again born on a threshold. He was born on the threshold between the Victorian age and the modern age. So now, the Victorian age lasted from 1837, which was the beginning of Queen Victoria's reign, and ended when she died in 1901. Meanwhile, the modern age began, believe it or not, 1914 and lasted till 1945. You might ask yourself, what really important thing happened in between 1914 and 1945? Well, a lot of important things happened, but in particular, we had the beginning of World War I and then the ending of World War II. So Hemingway was born right in the middle of this. He was born in 1899 and died in 1961. Enter Ernest Miller Hemingway. No frilly shirts, no dancing, no worried about the rules of polite society. Frankly, he doesn't give a damn about any of it. And enter a new ideal for a man's man, the man of the modern age. On the left here, we have a picture of Ernest's parents, Clarence Edward Hemingway and Grace Hemingway. And then on the right, we have a picture of Ernest Hemingway as a baby. So you might be saying, well, he looks like a girl. And yes, because during that period of time, first, boys were often dressed in christening dresses. Some of you of the older generation might even have a picture of yourself looking much like this, being baptized or christened in a dress like this. But also, at this time, one of the Victorian ways was to treat little boys and little girls very much the same. So Grace raised Ernest as the younger twin sister to his older sister. So she dressed them alike, both like girls. I know, sounds weird, huh? Anyways, I can't say whether this was cruel and unusual or just something that happened in the time period. But Ernest didn't get to be a guy until many years after he was able to leave his mother's domain. So let me tell you about that a little bit. So Ernest's mother, Grace, wanted to be an opera singer, and apparently she was quite talented and all, but when she got on stage, the bright lights affected her eyes, and she was never able to pursue a career as an opera singer. Meanwhile, his father, Edward Hemingway, Dr. Edward Hemingway, was a doctor. Now, you would think that this would be a lot of status and all that good stuff, but not so much in the household of Grace Hemingway, because she was pretty domineering in the house. And by that I mean that she pretty much ruled the roost. Even if she had no status outside of the house, she was, today we would call that henpecked. Would be Ed was henpecked. And that would be a nice way to phrase it, what we might call it today. So Grace is running the house. Clarence is outside of the house most of the time, either being a doctor, or when he could get away, he would go for about 3 months of the summer to his cabin in Michigan. And there, Edward could be a guy. He could hunt and fish and do all the things that guy things did. So at home, Ernest's mother is trying to teach Ernest to play the cello. And you might imagine that the minute Ernest had an opportunity, he ran right out to, with his father, to the cabin and began that life that he was going to live, which was hunting and fishing and living out in the wilderness. So some more about Ernest's home life, or the status quo for Ernest and many young people in this period of time, early 1900s. I've already talked about Ernest had civilization at home, was opera and cello lessons, whereas with his dad was out in nature, in the wilderness, hunting and fishing. I've also talked a little bit about the role of women versus men, particularly in his household, where mom ruled the roost, dad was a bit henpecked and had to go out into wilderness to his man cave to get any sense of satisfaction. And next would be talking about religion of the time. So at this period of time, they were living in Ohio in a very conservative Protestant neighborhood. But now conservative in the early 1900s and conservative now, I'm not sure how similar that would be. So let me tell you about it. So Ernest was raised in a household, as were many people at that time, where God, the idea of God, was not what you hear about a lot today. Today you hear a lot about a loving Father God, a God who wants the best for you, a God who you're his son or his daughter, a God who's on your side, a God who loves you no matter what. Well, this is a fairly modern view of God. And by modern, I don't mean modern in terms of the modern age in the 1940s or 1914 to 1945. I mean modern as in like past the 70s. Okay? So in Ernest's time, God was a different creature. God was an angry, authoritative God who was pissed off at man and knew we were all sinners and we were all doomed and God could smite us at any minute and often did. And so this would have been the God that Ernest was raised with in his home. And as was frequent in this time period, people would use discipline to get people, to get religion, to get God. So Ernest grew up being whipped, oftentimes with a belt, and oftentimes because God was not happy with him. There is a quote from Ernest where he actually says, as a young boy, that he went out into the woodshed and whipped himself so Mama didn't have to. So you can see that this was a different view of God than we often hear about God and how God is portrayed today. Well, Ernest now is getting older. He likes to be with the guys. He doesn't want to be in the house. He loves being out in the wilderness. And World War I comes along. World War I started in 1914. Well, Ernest would have been 15 years old at this time. And all the men are going. And Ernest wanted to go to the war with the guys. But he was too young. And so he was just heartbroken that he couldn't go because Ernest wanted to be a hero. He wanted to go out there and make his mark on the world. So finally, by the time he's 17 and is old enough to go to the war, he goes and tries to enlist. But guess what? He has the same hereditary eye condition that his mother had. And the Army won't take him. One reason because of the eye condition, and another is because the war is starting to wind down at this point, and so they didn't need as many men. Well, Ernest was not going to miss out on this war. So he went to Italy, and he volunteered with the Italian Red Cross, driving an ambulance. Now, the thing is, he wasn't driving an ambulance on the front where all the shooting was. He was driving an ambulance behind the scenes in the safety zone, and oftentimes his ambulance was filled with chocolate, where he would be taking it to the wounded. Well, this does not work very well for getting a hero status. So one day, Ernest hijacks the ambulance and says he was going to find the war, and drove it to the front. And so Ernest joined the war and picked up a gun and started shooting. And within a matter of a couple of weeks, he was wounded. And he was actually fairly seriously wounded in that he got shrapnel all up and down his leg, thigh, backside, back. And he was in the hospital for quite a while because of this particular injury. Now, Ernest, always the storyteller, always the hero, also says that just before he ended up falling down from all of these wounds, he had picked up a fellow wounded soldier and dragged him, Forrest Gump style, to safety. This apparently is one of Hemingway's earlier fictions, because apparently that didn't really happen. So now Ernest is in the hospital. So he's a hero. He's been in war. He's been wounded. So you got a kid who's 18 maybe now, a hero. He just needs one more thing. A girl. Well, what better place than in the hospital to find a bunch of beautiful young nurses. And Ernest meets a young nurse named Agnes. Agnes is about 22 years old. And Agnes and Ernest have a lot of fun while he's in the hospital recuperating. Once he was able to get out more, he was on crutches, but he was able to go out and they were able to take in the sights and do some sightseeing and all while he was still recuperating. And Ernest falls madly in love with Agnes and determines that they are going to get married. She says, sure, let's get married. Well, Ernest heads back to Ohio, back to his mother's house, where, guess what? His mother didn't much think of him as a hero. She thought of him as a kid coming back into her house. And then Agnes wrote him a letter. a Dear John letter. But it doesn't say Dear John. It's much worse. It says, Dear Kid, it was fun, you're a great guy, but this isn't going to work, and I'm not coming, and we're not getting married. Well, Ernest is pretty devastated now. More about that in the next slide. So, Ernest comes home from war, and there's not much for him to do, and he begins to write. And the first things he writes are his experiences as a soldier. And two of these famous books are From Whom the Bell Tolls, or For Whom the Bell Tolls, and A Farewell to Arms. And on the right side here, you can see the picture of young Ernest after he came home and is still wounded from the shrapnel. So Ernest comes home. He's a hero, but there are thousands and thousands of young heroes coming home from the war, some much more heroic than Ernest. He's got no real prospects. He's got no girlfriend, and Ernest becomes what is called part of the lost generation. So now, if you know anything about World War I, it was a devastatingly horrible war. Not that all wars aren't, but it was horrible because it was trench warfare. This was man-to-man brutality. There was also this was the first time they had mustard gas, and they actually were blinded and got terrible lung problems, and it was just a really, really bad world war at this time. And so Ernest comes home, and he is very disillusioned, like many of the other young people coming home from war at this time. And they are referred to as, or this particular group of young people is referred to as the lost generation. This is the term used to describe the generation of writers active immediately after World War I. Gertrude Stein used the phrase in conversation with Ernest Hemingway, supposedly quoting a garage mechanic saying to her, "You are all a lost generation." The phrase signifies a disillusioned post-war generation characterized by lost values, lost belief in the idea of human progress, and a mood of futility and despair, leading to hedonism. The mood is described by F. Scott Fitzgerald in This Side of Paradise when he writes of a generation that found all gods dead, all wars fought, all faith in man shaken. So, Hemingway, Gertrude Stein, Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby. What do they do in Gatsby? They drink and they party, and they have nothing else. They're shallow. They have no values. They have nothing that they care about. This becomes the lost generation. After Ernest gets back over to Europe, and they would be he and his group of people, they would be in Paris in the cafes, and they would hear about parties. Right? They'd say, okay, there's this big party coming up. Let's all get on the train and go. Well, they heard about this one big party in a place called Pamplona, Spain. Now, you might have heard of this party. It's called the Running of the Bull. So Ernest and his entourage all moved to Pamplona to participate in the Running of the Bull. And here he fell in love with the bullfights and the matadors, and he named his first son after one of the famous matadors. And he wrote, another of his books called The Sun Also Rises. And this book is about a young soldier who comes home from war and goes to Spain. So here is another of his experiences being written by Ernest based on his own experience. As Ernest is traveling around and talking to these people and partying, and I mean, he's partying pretty hard. He's drinking. He has a wife. In fact, he had 4 wives. And for all 4 of his wives, he had girlfriends to go along with them. So he is living the life here. And sometime during this time, Ernest came up with what is called or known as the Hemingway Ode. And that is, although life may be followed by nada, a man can approach death with dignity and honor. So, we've talked about how he was raised with religion earlier. We've talked about the lost generation in particular has come to the belief that God is dead. And this is also a philosophy that was very prevalent through the modern age, and the modern age started in 1914 and went to 1945 with all of the advances that were going on in science. And sort of there was a man becomes God idea. This man is scientist now sort of takes over God's job. So this isn't just Hemingway's idea. We're talking about things that happen in the culture at the time. So let's talk about this. So if you're a Christian, then how does a Christian win? What is the ultimate boon for a Christian? Well, you go to heaven, right? You die, and heaven is the ultimate boon. Well, how do you get to heaven? Well, we have a series of rules in life that tell us what we have to do in order to get to heaven. Some of those rules are called the 10 Commandments, the thou shalt not, right? So that is sort of a list for Christians to understand what they need to do to win at this particular, I don't want to say game, but you know what I mean. The game of life, all right? And so, but what if you don't believe in God? What if you believe that you die, that's it? There is nada after this. And certainly the lost generation had seen enough death up front and close to have this idea, because again, there was trench warfare, man-to-man combat in World War I. So this generation had seen a lot of death. So the idea that after you die, that is it, was sort of Hemingway's view. So how does a man win? Death is going to get you. But how do you win? You approach it with dignity and honor and on your own terms. So, yeah, death is going to get you, but you're not going out without a fight. So, if you got a car and it's a fast car, it's better to drive at 150 miles an hour, and you might die, but you might not. And if that day you drive at 150 miles an hour and you don't die, you're a winner. Or, you know, there might be avalanche warnings the day that you're going to go skiing on that unprotected area of the mountain, but you might not die. You might beat the avalanche. You might beat the mountain. So Hemingway viewed man's job is to every day get up and face death head on with a bull, a lion, a, what a mountain. Go out there and face it, and you win. And even if on that day death gets you, you still are a winner because you went out on your own terms. Man can face death with dignity and honor on his own terms. You're going to read 3 stories, 2 Hemingway stories. The first one that we're talking about is a clean, well-lighted place. This is the one that I have marked as optional. And in this story, what you're going to see is nada. You've got an old man, and he's at death's door. There are no more mountains for him. There are no more women. There are no more fast cars. All this old man can do now is sit in a bar, a clean, well-lighted place, and he can try not to spill as he's drinking his alcohol. When he gets up to leave, he tries not to stumble as he walks out the door. So, for a Hemingway man, does that sound like a good way to die? Does a Hemingway man want to live to be 100 in a nursing home wearing Depends? Is that winning? Not too much in the Hemingway man's view. So, the Hemingway Code says, yeah, you're going to die, but by golly, it's going to be on your own terms. So we'll find out in this story that the old man has tried to kill himself. Okay, he has tried to hang himself, but his niece cut him down because she was worried about his soul. So in many faiths, particularly the Catholic faith, committing suicide is a sin. So she's trying to save him from that sin. But in doing so, I don't know. What do you think? His idea was to die with dignity and honor on his own terms. Her idea is to live and have a shot at heaven. So that is your story, The Clean, Well-Lighted Place. And in it, they're going to say a prayer. Our nada, who art in nada, nada be thy name. Our nothing, who art in nothing, nothing be thy name. This is Hemingway's atheism, his view of life after death. Complicated story. So far, we've seen Ernest Hemingway as the soldier. We've seen him as the bullfighter. Well, after you've fought a war and after you've fought some bulls, what are you going to go do next? So Ernest now is going to take on the African safari. So Ernest is going to go out with a guide, an experienced hunter, a great white hunter, who is going to show him how to hunt. And then after Ernest has his adventures as a hunter, well, what's he going to do next? Well, I might as well try some deep sea fishing. So we're going to talk about these next. Your second story is called The Short, Happy Life of Francis Macomber. This is the story of the African safari. So in this story, fairly young guy, maybe late 20s, early 30s, he lost generation couple, Francis and his wife Margot, Margot being the European or the French version of the term Margaret. they have adventured through Paris and Spain, and now they're going to Africa, and now they're going to hunt big game, lions and rhinoceros and buffalo and all kinds of African safari animals. And in this story, Francis Macomber, notice how the name Francis is a very feminized name that in the Victorian age could be used for both male and female. Francis Macomber is going to meet his guide or mentor. And this guy's name is Wilson. And Wilson was a real person, only he had a different name. But this guy was the real person that taught Hemingway to be a hunter. But more than teaching him to be a hunter, he was teaching him to be a man. How does a man behave? And so in this story, you'll see a couple that even looks a lot like Hemingway's own parents, in that Margot is henpecking Francis something terrible in this story. She's always yapping at him, nipping at him, embarrassing him. There's just, she can't find anything good about him. So they get into the jungle and are into the safari, and they meet Wilson. And Wilson is going to teach Hemingway how to be a man. After the adventures in the jungle, or on safari, then Hemingway turns to the sea, and in particularly Cuba. Hemingway was good friends with Fidel Castro. The two of them would drink, smoke Cuban cigars, and talk about fishing and politics and war and all of those things. And this is where Hemingway's book, The Old Man and the Sea, is going to come from. A great book if you understand the Hemingway Code. Otherwise, it's just an insane book where you're going, what the heck just happened? But if you get the Hemingway Code, fabulous book and fabulous movie, too. So let's talk the characteristics of a Hemingway man, and particularly compared to society's view of woman at this time. And I know I'm making huge generalizations here. So I understand that, and I'm just letting you know up front, this is not foolproof, this is not everyone, but I'm going to make them to sort of show this particular idea. So, the Hemingway man, where is a man's world? A man's world is in wilderness and in nature. And in today's society, many men don't get the opportunity to spend it out hunting big game or going deep sea fishing or any of that. So every man needs the man cave. Every man, because really, isn't the house the woman? So every man needs his own man cave. It might be a garage. It might be a closet. It might be his own bathroom. Who knows what the man cave is? But men need the man cave because they need that area that is not feminine. Okay? Women now need civilization. And a lot of this has to do with woman's ultimate boon. So, generally for women as a group, the most important thing women can do is have babies. And it's one thing they can do that men cannot do. And so women, in order to have children and protect them and raise them to adulthood safely, they need civilization. Civilization is very helpful in helping mothers raise children. Men have children, but men do not raise children in the same way that women do. And particularly, remember, I'm talking 1900s, early 1900s, the roles of men versus the roles of women. So women, from the very youngest age of mothering, have to teach children social order, rules, and law to keep children safe. Don't touch that hot stove. Look both ways before crossing the street. All of the rules and laws help women raise children to maturity. However, those rules and laws do not work as well for men if they have a different form of survival than women do, because women are surviving in wilderness, getting the food, bringing home the meat. And so the laws that apply in civilization could be the very thing that kills a man in wilderness. So in civilization, women say, don't run, walk, don't go fast, don't drive your car fast. Well, the speed limit is 55 miles an hour. Well, if you're in the wilderness and something's chasing you, you need to run fast. If you're in a war zone, 55 miles an hour might get you killed when you need to be driving as fast as that vehicle can take you. Same thing with law versus justice. In our civilization, a person can be the most heinous, awful, God-forsaken person we know. And there might not even be any doubt about their guilt. But what are we going to do before we decide what we're going to do? We have trials and appeals and trials, and still, even if you get the capital punishment, they might die on death row before they're actually put to death by society, because society talks about it, has meetings about it, has trials about it. In the wilderness, if a man steals your horse, are you going to put him on trial? No. Justice in wilderness is entirely different than justice in civilization. Let's talk a little bit about biology. Okay, women have just several children. And for a woman to win, to raise those children to adulthood or to maturity, keep them safe, it's very helpful to have a man around. She's got this finite number of kids. If she can get the man there to help her raise them, they have a lot better shot of raising them safely to maturity. A man, however, can have infinite number of children. And in the wilderness, the man or the lion or the animal, the way man wins is, in many cases, the more sperm out there, the more progeny, the more extension of the man's legacy. So woman needs monogamy because it helps her get her ultimate boon. Man tends to have the idea of biology, which says the man with the most progeny wins. Language versus action. Women talk. Men act. Okay? I know that for many of you, when you go home tonight, many of you women will want to talk to your guy. You'll want to, if it's me, I want to tell them about my day. I want to tell them where I was, what I did, who I saw, what I was thinking and feeling. And my guy will nod and mostly glaze over very quickly. And I'll also ask him about his day. And he'll say, fine, good, whatever. Will I get anything out of him? No, because men don't value talking as much as women. Again, big generalization. Okay, last one, faith in God and law versus faith in self. I think that one is self-explanatory. Back to your stories and how this relates. A clean, well-lighted place is about how does a man live with dignity and honor, particularly when facing death. Now that is going to be a theme in the other two stories as well. A Short Happy Life of Francis Macomber on the African Safari, and in Selway, where Baby and Jack go on a river rafting trip. So Jack also is a Hemingway man. And look in this story to see how Jack feels about death. When Baby's talking to him there towards the end of this river rafting, where they've already survived against all the odds. And Jack is going to say, if I make it, I'll meet you around the bend. And she says, and if you don't make it? He just smiles and runs off to get back in that boat and go back down one more rapid. Okay, Jack as the Hemingway man in this story, in the way he views wilderness and nature, the way he views death. There's not much in the way of religion in it, but also the way he uses language. And so in all of these stories, one of the things you're going to see is the men don't talk. And if you just look at the first page of A Clean, Well-Lighted Place, you'll see those short, clipped sentences. One-word sentences, yes, no, or 2 or 3 word sentences. Why? Because men don't talk. Men act. And in Short Happy Life of Francis Macomber, you'll see Francis talking like a woman to Wilson. He'll say things like, aren't you afraid? And Wilson says, yes, but we don't talk about it. Francis will say something else, and Wilson say, it's bad form to mention it. Wilson is training Francis in how men talk. So you'll see that in the stories. Certainly you will see action in the stories. And then the last thing, we're coming to an end here, the last thing is women. So why do you think Hemingway is considered a misogynist? Besides the fact that, of course, he had multiple wives and multiple girlfriends, that is definitely one thing. Besides the fact that he was a big-time drinker. Besides the fact that he considered killing himself a dignified way for a man to end his life. Okay? Besides all of those things, that make some people think he's a misogynist. I don't know why. But besides those things, Hemingway had another thing that he wanted to say. And this is that, man, you go out there and you climb that mountain, you drive that car fast, you face that lion, you go against that big fish, And he says, and yes, you go and do it. And you love those women. But Hemingway says that man has one enemy that is fiercer than the lion, fiercer than the avalanche, fiercer than the fast car, fiercer than all of those things put together. And what is that enemy? Well, women. Why women? Because women stand between man and his hero's journey. If you're, think about it, women love the Hemingway Man. So when you're 19 and you see a guy who's got a hot car, fast and red and beautiful and a convertible and all of those exciting things, and it's a two-seater, you're headed out on your journey in this car. That is great. Woman marries man. Woman gets pregnant. What happens to the fast two-seater? Excuse me. So, woman, in her need to reach her ultimate boon of protecting her family, her needs are often against the needs of the Hemingway Man to go out and face death every day in a bigger and bigger way. That makes her a danger to the Hemingway Man's hero's journey. And so, in effect, Hemingway's saying, avoid the scissors. Snip, snip. Women have something much more dangerous than a lion. They have the scissors. And women can, if a man allows it, a woman can emasculate a man and keep him from his hero's journey. Back to a clean, well-lighted place. What kept the old man from completing his life with dignity and honor? His niece. What did she do? Snip, snip. Cut down the rope. Look for these ideas as you read these stories. And as we go through them, we're going to talk about, or is it true? Does it still exist? Do we want Hemingway men in our lives? What is the significance of this in our society today? And coming up next week, we're going to look at how this plays out in our society today, mainly by looking at TV commercials. And if you look at fast food commercials in particular, Carl's Jr., Burger King, Jack in the Box, you look at beer commercials, you look at Old Spice commercials, you look at these commercials, and what are you going to see? You're going to see the Hemingway Code played out over and over again. So that's it for this section. We'll meet next week and talk about the story.